Good evening, everyone. This is the Daily Examiner, and I am Victoria O'Brien. Thank you for joining us this evening. This evening I'll be interviewing Brenton Faithfull, who is an Auckland-based funeral director. Brenton has decided to come forward with his observations. He has quite famously been already interviewed by Liz Gunn and also by Sean Plunkett. This evening, the Daily Examiner will question him on his credentials and the background. And it's different for us to see a person in such a industry to speak about their observations. So that's why we're very privileged to have Brenton join us this evening. So if we could bring on Brenton.
Good evening, Victoria.
Good evening, Brenton.
Thanks for inviting me.
Not at all. I think everyone wants to know. I think you've been having some meetings, public meetings. They have been based.
Yes, I have had some public meetings just in my own locality where I live. It was suggested to me that I just come and talk to a group of interested people, and it turned out I would happen to be the Voices for Freedom speaker for the month. But the following two speeches I did were outside of the Voices for Freedom. I didn't want to get labelled a conspiracy theorist or such like. I just want to be able to speak my truth and my findings without under the platform. I was criticised by the mainstream media very heavily right from the outset.
So, Brenton, could you tell us before we get into the nitty-gritty of things, what is your background? So, I mean, you've been in the funeral industry for quite a long time.
Yes, I have. I've been. It's almost 41 years that I've been a funeral director in embalmer. I joined back in the beginning of 1982, a firm, and established training regime under that firm. And went to Wellington, gained my qualifications at the Technical Institute in Wellington, both in embalming and funeral directing. So it's a qualification that's available for New Zealand funeral directors. It's not essential to have a qualification to become a funeral director, but it certainly helps if you want to have your own business, which I did after 10 years. So 30 years in my own business.
Very good. It would be fair to say that you are very well experienced then. And you've held some industry roles as well?
Yes, with the Embalmers Association, I spent 9 years on the executive committee, 3 of those as an executive member, 4 as the secretary of the National Association, and 2 as president. But I also did the journal for 4 years as well, as the editor of the journal, putting out a publication every 6 weeks for all the members of the association. Served as Auckland District Chairman of the Funeral Directors Association, of which I'm not a member now of the Funeral Directors Association. I chose to not be a member of the association. I just feel that they've been quite outspoken about me because I'm not a member any longer. So I think they've indicated I'm not a registered funeral director. So I just wanted to make it clear what a registered funeral director in their eyes is. It's someone who pays a membership fee to their association. You're actually registered with your local authority as a funeral director, and that's something I've been registered for 30 years. So it's registration, and what they're talking about is a member of their association. So I'm as registered as anybody else is in New Zealand.
Very good. So please say, why have you decided to come forward now? Because this has been going on for a little while, and it's great. You do, or you have. John O'Looney, of course, famously in the UK, has spoken up earlier than you have, but New Zealand is about 6 months behind, so it kind of works out.
Yes, we have lagged 6 months behind, and I did see John O'Looney when he first spoke out, and I spoke with my wife, and we observed that he had been struck off his association register in England. He was removed as a member, which I guess that's very concerning when you are a member of an association. So I watched John, and I've watched a lot of his videos. John himself is a funeral director. He's not an embalmer, but he has an embalmer on staff whom he can go and observe what is happening. So our rollout, yes, took 6 months after theirs, and I concur with what John has seen. and Richard Hirschman in USA. Richard, of course, has taken samples of the clots. Now, I was always reluctant to take samples because they don't belong to me, they belong to someone's precious loved one. And I just didn't want to be accused of taking something that didn't belong to me. So I have observed, but with the talks I've given and the fact that these clots that have appeared in the last 12 months or so are being discharged down the sewage system like any body waste does during the embalming process.
So let's first talk about, so what changed and when did you first see that change in order for you to say, hey, something's wrong here?
The observations of families sharing with me. Now, during the course of what we call the funeral arrangement, when the families engage our services and ask us to look after their loved one and the funeral process, it comes to pass as a lot of information is exchanged from the family to ourselves. And I'm observing the deaths, and of course one of the questions I'll ask is how long has the deceased been ill for? You know, what happened, when were they diagnosed? And to me, the amazement to me was, well, look, Mum was really good until last week. She was absolutely fine. And I said, what happened last week? Well, she had her vaccine. You know, we dutifully sent her along to get it because we felt it was important that the elderly received the vaccine. So I said, do you think there was, you know, any correlation between the vaccine and they would often dismiss, saying, well, look, Mum is in her 70s or in her 80s, and I guess it comes to us all. But I just kept it to myself, and I kept tabulations of the number of people who died. Now, one particular doctor who was no longer practicing, he was mandated out of his career, had a dad who was vaccinated, and he insisted his dad didn't get it, but his own sister said to the father, you know, you need to get the vaccine, Dad. So he consented and had the vaccine, and 4 days later, the father passed away. Now, he asked me, what can I do? Because the death certificate didn't say vaccine-related death on it. He died of some natural cause. So I said, well, look, we can ring the coroner's office. So he rang the coroner's office, coronial office, didn't actually speak to a coroner, but was advised if there was a death certificate, the coroner's office weren't interested in engaging. If the doctor's happy to sign, they're under a lot of pressure, and the doctor's certificate, which is different from what used to happen yesteryear. If there was any doubt whatsoever, a coroner would say, no, we need to have an investigation. So we tried to get a private post-mortem. He asked me the names of pathologists that I knew of, and we contacted all available pathologists, but there is a shortage of pathologists in New Zealand. There's been a desperate cry for the pathologists to come, and that's often there's a delay between the death and the release of the body from the coroner because the availability or unavailability of pathologists. We are bringing them in from overseas, I understand. But no pathologist was available to do a private post-mortem, which he was prepared to pay for. So he came away very disillusioned. But my count still continued, and families were very willing to share with me the dates in which the vaccine had been administered to the patient, and certainly I saw the majority had died within 2 weeks. Now, when I talked to Dr. Matt Sheldon, he said in Wellington there's been relatively few deaths, and he wondered whether the batch up in our area of New Zealand may have had some sort of other condition attached to it. I don't want to go down rabbit holes, but it's surprising that the majority of deaths, where I live in a high elderly area, an elderly population, there seem to be a lot of deaths within a very short time.
So you actually, you're not the only one who's made this observation. I have spoken to at least 2 other funeral directors in the past, albeit quite a few months ago now, and in different parts of the country. And both of them have also said that they've observed a correlation, and it's usually with a rollout in the rest homes in the area.
Yes.
So they've observed a very large increase in business volumes.
One of the things that, Victoria, that was stated at the second talk I gave, there was a registered nurse who stood up and said that she was mandated out of a job, but she overheard the management of the rest home talking about the payment that they would receive if all the residents were vaccinated and the staff were vaccinated as well. So there was she explained to me that there was money involved, that the rest home would receive payment. I don't know who the payment would come from, but that's what she stated and was willing to do an affidavit about it.
Okay. So have you seen, so I mean, obviously what you're saying is that you've seen a volume increase. Are you able to quantify it in percentage terms, that volume?
Percentage of increase of what?
Well,
sorry?
Let's say a jump up in number of people coming through the door, sort of thing.
Well, I think we've got to look at nationally, because sometimes there's very localised reasons why some firms are busier than others. For instance, if there's a cold snap in Dunedin in Christchurch, they can get relatively busy during the winter usually because of respiratory illnesses and deaths from the heart having to work harder. So nationally, I'm told from the figures that there is an increase this year, especially this year, up in the order of 20% or 22% of increase.
So we've got a few graphs here. I think New Zealand's not alone. So just graphs from Our World in Data. So it's entirely publicly available. So what we have here are New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, and Denmark, chosen because clearly Australia is very close to New Zealand. Singapore and Denmark were chosen to be geographically quite separate, different climates, but highly vaccinated countries, highly vaccinated populations, and also fairly reliable first world type record keeping. So what you can see here is a chart showing excess deaths from the start of January 2021. In fact, if you pull up the chart from 2020, you'll see that for all of 2020, it in fact goes, sort of fluctuates around the average between, when we're talking about the average, referring for the years 2015 to 2019. So the first part, it just sort of fluctuates around that. And then for the 2021 year onwards, it starts to have a little bit of an increase, but the really marked increase is now seen in the 2022 year, where basically for all four countries, all their lines are above the average. So for throughout 2022, all four countries have had excess deaths. So that's exactly what you're saying. It's quite noticeable that Singapore has had very high excess deaths spikes, and that's over 40%. And also New Zealand has it's in fact been over 30% at one stage. So it is quite a significant increase, and for it to be sustained right throughout this year is remarkable.
Yes.
So,
I've seen a similar graph with New Zealand, and there's what's called an actuary number. There's actuaries who predict the population. You know, the life insurance policies have to be calculated on the expected death rate within each country.
sure.
And certainly we've seen an increase the whole year of this year. Interesting, going back to that graph of 2020, during the winter, there was no influenza. There was no deaths of influenza, and normally there'd been something like 500 deaths per annum.
We were pretty much locked down.
We were locked down, so that means the influenza hadn't come from overseas because the borders were closed as well. So it does show that influenza does come from overseas. I think if our borders were locked and we were locked down, so those transfers, influenza was eliminated in 2020. Interesting.
So let's go back to what you've actually been seeing in your business. So it's not just obviously people coming through telling you what's happened to their family members or their friends' health just before they passed, but also perhaps your personal observation. I mean, you mentioned about clots. So when I spoke to the others in the industry earlier on this year, or in fact, it was right at the start of the year, they hadn't actually noticed the clots. So when did you start noticing
Well,
an
of course,
unusual
not everyone is
presentation?
embalmed, and during the lockdowns that we had, when we really didn't have funeral services, and total lockdown on level 4, there were no funerals, so deceased people were actually just being cremated and with no ceremony. So we weren't able to embalm those bodies. So a lot of the cases, up to 50%, I think in 2020, of the cases that we looked after had no funeral service. 2021, similar, we were locked down again for quite a good part of 2021. So we're not embalming those bodies. So you're not going to see clots in those bodies. It's only the ones that families have chosen to view. So the clots I started observing probably a year ago, just little ones, and they've grown bigger over the years. So the longest clots I've seen are around 30 millimeters long. So whatever it is that these clots are made of, and I know independent laboratories have tested these clots, and they're not blood clots. They're clots of a different nature. The chemical composition is not from blood coagulating and clotting. It seems to be another process that's happening. And may I say, they're only visible in the vaccinated bodies. People have had received vaccination, not unvaccinated bodies.
So you've where you've performed the embalming, you've taken note when the family member has told you that this person has been vaccinated or not, and have you found, so for all the unvaccinated people that you have had through your doors, none of them have had clots?
No, not one. Not one has had the particular clot that I'm talking about, the rubbery fibrous clot, and they're white in nature. So they're called, I understand they're called an amyloid protein. It's a combination between a protein and a carbohydrate, but it's never been discovered in bodies before. So that's the analysis of it. So I know that independent scientists are trying to work out how these are made, how the body is making these clots inside their body.
So you have not seen these clots before a year ago?
No, not like this. There are bodies that do have coagula and clots. So the longer a person between their time of death and the time that we receive them, or they're embalmed, clots, post-mortem clots can occur, coagula and clots. But I've not seen clots like these ones before in the 40 years I've been embalming.
Right. So can you or do you have any numbers as to, or observations as to any changes in ages of the people coming through?
No, actually quite significant. The people who are dying, and I say the majority, I'm up into the 90% mark or so, had died within 2 weeks of getting the vaccine. So there are some who didn't receive the vaccine, and there were some who died outside of that 2 weeks. But by far the majority of cases that we looked after, from when I started counting at the beginning of August last year to the end of July, but by far they died within 2 weeks.
So do you have any figures, an idea how many of the people were vaccinated and how many have not been?
Well, we can only go with Ministry of Health. To me, I don't feel that number is accurate. We're told that 95% of the population have been vaccinated, but I think you've got to look at their database and where the base rate is. For instance, I think from my understanding is it's if you've been to the hospital or the doctor within the last 2 years, you're counted within that team of 5 million. But I haven't been. I've been quite healthy. I haven't needed to go to the doctor. So my understanding is I probably wasn't counted in that 95% or the 5% who chose to. To me, I researched quite early on and saw in the MedSafe documentation that they've given provisional membership, provisional approval of the vaccine, provisional provided the test results. I'm not anti-vax by any means. I've had vaccinations all through my life. One of the ones you have is hepatitis B. When you're dealing with blood products, it's an ideal one to have. Traveling overseas when I was younger, going to Indonesia, we were required to have yellow fever and cholera. So
Sure.
definitely not anti-vax. But when the WHO changed the criteria and the definition of what a vax is, and something's under provisional, we all know that this vaccine was rushed through very, very quickly, and the tests are being done, the trials are being done now, and I chose not to be part of the trials, so I've chosen not to be vaccinated, and I will make my decision once the trials are over. I think originally they were going to be the 2nd of May 2023, but I think the government extended the trials for another 3 years beyond that. So
let's go back to what you're seeing in your business. So what, I guess my question, a couple of questions ago now, would have been, so usually, would I be wrong in saying that usually you'd see more elderly in your business?
Majority of people who die are senior citizens. It's just the nature of life. You know, you usually pass away after a good age. I am seeing younger people. Now I'm saying younger, they're in their 40s and 50s. We haven't done any children who've passed away in the area that I live, but I'm aware that there are vaccine injuries and there have been deaths. One of the other concerns is the reporting with any experiment, with any trials that occur. It's totally reliant on the reporting. Any experiment that's done, you'll have a control, and then you'll have the reporting back to see if the vaccine is effective. Now, we were mandated into getting no jab, no job, but doctors themselves aren't mandated to report any adverse effects. They're encouraged to.
It's a voluntary, it's a voluntary system.
Voluntary. In my understanding, I haven't filled in a form, but from people I've asked, it does take 20 minutes or so. And we know how busy doctors are and how surgeries have changed because of the distances and the wearing of masks, and doctors just don't have time. They work pretty long days anyway. Most of my friends who are doctors start at 8 o'clock in the morning or 7:30 in the morning and are working through to 7:30 at night.
Indeed.
Setting test results. They don't have time to do that reporting. So Calm on their website claim 5% reporting probably is what's occurring. I dare say it's less than that. So
it's similar to what's happening with the VAERS website, VAERS in the US, where in fact it's even worse. I think the
1%.
I think it's 1%. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you extrapolate that out, if we say generously with 5%, so the number of adverse effects will be 20 times what they are now. They've had 177 reported deaths to them, of which they've claimed 1 definitely and 2 still pending after the investigation of a post-mortem. I don't believe that for a minute. I'm sorry, I don't. I think from what families are sharing with me, the person was well and healthy prior to the vaccine, and after that, they've gone suddenly downhill and within 2 weeks have died.
Indeed. So, have you, like I said, you saw that there are more people now in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Have you?
40s and 50s. I'm not saying 30s, but I am aware from reading newspapers or that there are people passing away in their 30s, active sportsmen with myocarditis, sure. and the fact that the media are trying to normalise myocarditis. I've never had anybody in 40 years die of myocarditis ever. And pericarditis very, very rarely, but the number of young people who seem to be suffering. So you've got to look at the spike protein within the vaccine, what it's actually doing. It's causing that inflammation. It's going to the heart, going to the different organs, and causing that inflammation.
So when obviously when you receive, you create the death certificate, I believe, or you receive the death certificate?
No. So the confusion of what is a death certificate, the doctors write out a medical certificate. The medical certificate is to cause of death. We also obtain from the family statistical information about the deceased person, combine that with the medical certificate, and send that to the Registrar of Births, Deaths and Marriages. In turn, they collate all that information, enter it into the book of births, deaths and marriages, and send us a certificate of that back again. So we apply for a certificate. Anybody can apply for a certificate. We usually do it on the family's behalf. So,
right. So I mean, throughout this, obviously, then you find out the cause of death, or what the doctor has listed as the cause of death, and also any contributing conditions that the person might have had. Have you seen any change in what is described as the cause of death?
No, they're just carrying on as if there's no doctors are putting down what they've been putting down before. I've had two certificates that have stated an underlying cause being COVID, but died of natural causes, but an underlying condition of COVID. But certainly the doctors are just putting down natural causes, heart or lungs or cancer. Personally, I've lost a lot of friends through aggressive forms of cancer that have started up from, I may not necessarily do their funeral, or say their acquaintances. I've also lost a number of friends due to suicide as well, because of the lockdowns, because of the mandates and lockdowns. They were in the hospitality business, 2 friends who had restaurants, lost everything, lost their livelihood, lost their house, lost their business, lost their life.
Indeed.
That's pretty sad.
So, I mean, this is what you're observing in sort of the cause of death explanations in the death certificates. That is, in fact, in accordance with the causes of death that have been reported by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, because they have quite an extensive reporting. Every time they come out with their death numbers each month, they go back and say, well, you know, what did most people die from? And it's quite interesting that it's exactly the usual causes. But it is cancer, dementia, and heart issues. So it's similar to what you said.
Yeah, a lot of people have told me it's brain fog after receiving a vaccine, and it's one of the side effects. Soreness, redness, swelling, brain fog, heart palpitations, sore heart, inability to breathe, and then women have menstrual problems as well, unusual bleeding. There's a whole raft of but I don't believe these are being reported as well as adverse effects. I just do not believe the statistics that are coming through CALM. So,
as we touched on, it's a voluntary system.
Yeah, perfect. The people who come to the talks, have listened to, and the organiser of the talk asked people to raise their hand if they have personally been affected or know somebody, not someone they read on social media, but someone within the family or extended family who have been personally affected by the vaccine, had a vaccine injury, and virtually every hand in the room went up in there. So we are seeing these vaccines, and they're still advertising as being safe and effective. I just feel there's a real anomaly there.
One of the big issues we have with our reporting system, like we've said, is that it is voluntary. So something that would be quite interesting for our viewers to look up is a news item that was broken by GB News overseas of Israeli data. So what happened there was that the Israeli Ministry of Health decided to actually have a non-voluntary reporting from about December last year through to about May this year, and where they actively followed up people who had taken vaccine, and to see what kind of adverse reactions they had. And so this was not a voluntary thing, right? This is quite different to CALM or the yellow card system or VERSE. And what was interesting is that the reporting was much more thorough, and it showed conditions and adverse reactions which hadn't been listed ever, even on Pfizer's own rather extensive list of possible adverse reactions. What was also an interesting observation was that a lot of the neurological conditions were not transient. and that they lasted for a long time, for basically to the end of the study period. And that this group of doctors that were tasked with reporting came back to the government and said, look, you better do something about this because this opens you up to legal action. The reason why the reporting period stopped in May was because the results were not very good. So it was stopped.
Sure. Okay. So it's obviously a greater increase in numbers from the voluntary reporting.
Massive.
So I think we'll go to a question that you asked me, Victoria, as well, as why did I choose to speak out now? Well, I'm aware that the Coroner's Amendment Act has been called for submissions, which closed just over 2 weeks ago, for the coroner. Now, the coroner, there used to be 92 coroners in New Zealand, and some of them didn't do anything. They lived in small towns, but most places in New Zealand had a coroner, and the funeral director would need to go and get the paperwork done if the post-mortem had been held in a major city, and they're in a small rural town. The coroner would have to sign off the paperwork. In Auckland, we were very lucky that the coroner was in the area where the pathology department was, so all the paperwork was done for us by the police. With the change in the Coroner's Act some years ago, they streamlined the service and nationalised the service, and had 15 coroners only appointed. I think they've got 5 extra auxiliary coroners who help out when it's busy or when the coroner goes on leave. So the whole coronial service is being conducted by 15 coroners. Now, there is a tremendous workload that these coroners have placed now on them, and at any one point in time during the evening, one coroner is on duty for the whole country. So any death that gets reported to the coronial service, to the police, goes through that one coroner. So it could be in Gore, it could be in Hamilton, it could be in Kaitaia. So everything's been nationalised into one service. And the coroner has always been, like the coronial service itself stems from ancient times. It's probably over 1,000 years old when they first started appointing justices and people to look after. Society needed to know why people died. They needed to know the circumstances and whether any crime was involved. So it's over 1,000 years old, the coronial service of its type. So throughout history, the coroner has always made recommendations. If the death was unexpected and the circumstances were that something could be changed, the coroner would make recommendations, change the camber of the road, for instance, because there's been 2 deaths in the last year on that particular section of road. So the recommendation goes out. Now, what the Coroner's Amendment Act is going to allow the discretion of the coroner not to go public with findings that they have. So if there's an adverse death from adverse effects from the vaccine, they're not necessarily going to have to release those figures to the public. The inquest can be held within closed chambers. And so there's not going to be the transparency that we have been able to see. Anyone could attend an inquest. It was open for the public. And so let's just come up on the screen. The other thing was to replace vaccine injured deaths as natural causes, I understand as well. They're going to call those natural categorize a vaccine injured into just natural causes. So
hang on, I mean this section that is shown now, I mean this is what they're expecting to change. So are you saying that now the coroners have greater discretion to classify something as natural causes, or just put down that it's unexplained and it's fine? You don't. They're not. There's always been. There are some deaths that are just unexplained, just obscure natural causes. They don't know, and from time to time these do appear, and it's distressing for family because they'd like to know: is there some genetic factor that may have caused the death, or what? So these have always been in there, but it's the ones that are obvious to everybody else that there's a vaccine injury. Are going to be put down as natural causes, obscure natural causes, or natural causes for these deaths when there really should be more investigation going on. So does it's not a requirement to have a postmortem. The coroner's discretion is as to whether he chooses an autopsy or not. So there may be a religious reason why
the family don't want an autopsy. They don't want desecration of
Indeed.
the body. So the coroner's then limited. He may do a limited post-mortem. Maybe they have a suspicion as to what the caused death and just do a limited post-mortem, or not one at all. They've got equipment that can see inside the body, CAT scans and MRI
Yes.
scans and things that they can also use as well in place of a post-mortem. But there always have been from time to time, but there seems to be more and more now of vaccine-related injuries. And we've seen the one confirmed one with 2 pending the outcome. Well, I believe there's a lot more than that. But
So this is really this area that you strongly oppose in the Coroner's Amendment Bill. We can see that it's going through select committee now.
yes, I've sent a submission in to oppose it.
Yeah.
Whether we'll hear anything, I chose not to speak to it, but definitely I sent a submission in opposing that. It's not only New Zealand that's doing this; it seems to be all the OECD countries as well. They're all in unison with this amendment now to the laws.
So do you think it was, I mean, it seems like it was quite quick. So from the time that the bill was first introduced to it's going through to the first reading and then select committee. So
it's interesting. It coincided with the news of the vaccine death as well. It was around about that same time, around the end of August.
I see.
The coroner spoke out and said, yes, we have our first vaccine injured death. So let's sweep it under the carpet.
Do you, out of for all your other colleagues in the business, I'm sure you get together and have a chat. Do you have a sense that they're seeing the same things as you are?
Well, part of belonging to the association is the socialisation. They do have conferences every 6 months, and part of that is going. So not being a member, I don't get to go to those conferences, but I do speak to other funeral directors. Most of them are the independent ones outside of the industry, but they're also sharing with me. They've got concerns. They've seen things, but they're unwilling to speak out just for fear. I think a lot of people have commended me for my bravery, but I think it's taken courage for me to speak out because it could have an adverse effect in many ways. But I feel duty bound. I'd rather let my grandchildren know that we tried our best to outline the concerns that we had over this vaccine rollout and the adverse effects than not doing anything at all.
So what sort of penalties would you face? So for example, I mean, like you said, John O'Looney said that he was deregistered from his association. However, as you say, it just not being a member of the association doesn't mean you're not a practicing funeral director. So what sort of consequences could there be other than that?
So a lady came up to me at a funeral and said she was in her local department store the other day and asked me if I knew this particular funeral director. And I said, I did, yes. He said, well, he shared with me the fact that he manages 5 funeral homes and wrote a letter to the New Zealand Herald about his concern about the number of deaths that were occurring. And he believed as a result of the vaccine. The New Zealand Police, representative of the New Zealand Police came around to his house and told him to withdraw the letter and not to write any more letters, or it could be very detrimental to him. So that's our New Zealand Police saying that. I have a lot of respect for the police. In fact, the police I've worked with for 31 years, they actually gave me what's called a Citizens Award. They only give out 2 a year, and I was a recipient back in 2016 for working with the police for 31 years. So I work when someone dies from a sudden death, they have to be transported for a post-mortem down to the Auckland mortuary. So the area that we operated in stretched about 80 kilometres to the north and about 12 kilometres to the south and everywhere in between across to. So it was a very wide area. When someone passed away, the police would ring us because we have the transportation equipment and would transfer them to the hospital. So that was something that we would do under a contract. So I've got a lot of respect for the police, but I just feel that sometimes their hands are tied. I've had a large number of police, or I say four have rung me in the last 2 weeks, 4 ex-policemen who have congratulated me on taking a stand, really speaking out, and they were mandated out of a job. They chose not to have a vaccine, and of course had to stand down as a policeman. So I've had support from ex-policemen, and I just feel that if that's what the New Zealand Police are being told to do, is to go around and talk to people who are choosing to speak out, then I think we've got a sad world. Losing our role.
You haven't to date had a visit from the police yet.
No, I haven't. No, I don't think I will either. I don't expect that I will. But I mean, we don't know. I'm not speaking against the government's narrative. All I'm just asking is people question, and certainly I've chosen not to be vaccinated until the final results are in, and that it is safe and effective.
I mean, well, all you are really doing is sharing what you're observing in your business.
Yes, that's correct.
So everything, and you've got the numbers to show it, right? You said you've tabulated everything.
Yes. So I've been reluctant to take the evidence, but if it's going to go down the drain, I think the consensus is if these clots are being put down the drain, now, if there is anything in these clots that might be adverse, some people have said to me, why are they going down the drain? Why aren't they being incinerated or destroyed? But any human waste, it goes down the sewage system, and the sewage system treats these. The concern was if they're not being treated with the normal clot dispersing chemical that we use during embalming, if they're not being destroyed, will these actually be destroyed? Will they get into our ecosystem further out to sea? But no, the way that our wastewater is treated, they won't be put out to sea. So
some of course you will have a lot of people who doubt you, and say, well, there's nothing you can say that can be backed up. But that's you are bound by confidentiality. I mean, you can't reveal.
No, that's right. I mean, there's some families who would be shocked that I am speaking out because they've confided in me that mum was vaxxed, and I haven't given any names of any families, but other families who are in support of what I'm saying and saying you have our blessing, and there is a chance my business could be affected as well if the 95% number is accurate. As I said, I don't believe it is. The number of people who have been vaccinated, I don't believe personally, but we're told that by the media, and I just don't share that 95%. I think there's more people who are silent, who are saying nothing. But I've had hundreds and hundreds of messages of people just saying good on you for sharing what you're seeing.
So I mean, the
maybe
key
the only
number.
one, but I'm hoping that my colleagues in the funeral profession will speak out as well and share what they're seeing in terms of numbers and in terms of embalmers out there seeing clots. Now clots aren't our friend when we're embalming, because it means the distribution of the fluid around the body is compromised. So we've got to overcome that by using multiple injection sites on the deceased. So I don't want to get too carried away what embalming is, but it does prove to be difficult when the body has clots in it.
So how do you find out that a body has a clot? I mean, obviously it's not visible.
Yeah. Well, it's not visible until you start injecting. They're either going to be in the artery or they're in the vein as well. So generally a clot's not in the artery, because the artery is what's being pumped from the heart. Generally there's not a clot in the artery. It's usually in the venous system, but these clots are actually being found in arteries as well. I have seen reports of post-mortem pathologists finding them in post-mortems, but they're not saying anything. They're actually not saying that they're there, which is concerning.
So, would you say that if more of your colleagues speak out, would you hope that things might change? I mean, they all run the risk,
well, yeah, there's a risk in everything in life, and I just hope that that I'm the first to speak out. I'm aware of in New Zealand. There are funeral directors in Australia who've spoken out. There's funeral directors in Canada. There's funeral directors in Japan who have spoken out. There's funeral directors in the UK and in Europe. And there are people who are seeing what I'm seeing all around the world. So I'm not sure why I'm the only one in New Zealand that's seeing these. That's a mystery to me.
Well, I mean, obviously you're not, because you're saying that your colleagues have spoken to you quietly about it, but they're just not speaking out. I mean, I guess the in the lead up to things, we can probably see that, you know, there's a change in St. John's call out numbers, for example, because that's a precursor. And St. John's has published some numbers about the incidence of, well, the numbers for call outs on heart issues. And well, they have shown, they have seen an increase, quite significant in also, like what you said, unfortunately, suicide attempts have increased for various causes. It would have been lockdowns and other issues related to, I guess, this very difficult time.
I do have a friend who's an ambulance officer, concur with that. I went for dinner at a friend's place on a main highway the other day, and it was just ambulance after ambulance after ambulance going by. I think I counted in a two-hour period, 7 ambulances go by his home on the way to the area that I live in. So that's
significant.
Higher than average.
Indeed. Well, I think that sort of wraps up our conversation. I hope this has been a useful conversation to our audience. I think it's it is brave of you to speak out, Brenton, because there is quite a potential for blowback on yourself and your business, which is obviously your livelihood and your career, which you've built up over a very long time. But to have someone of your experience, your extensive experience, not just in one area, but you've because of the length of time and your experience, you've participated right across the industry. So for you to speak up now with that background, and I'm sure if there was nothing to say, you wouldn't have spoken up. So
yeah, I had no reason to speak up other than what I've seen. I would have remained quiet if there was nothing to see. But I'm speaking up, not to seek fame or fortune, but just to share with the world that there are issues with the rollout of these vaccinations. There are adverse effects, and the most major one, of course, is death.
Absolutely, the most serious of all. Thank you very much, Brenton. Much appreciated, and thank you for our audience.
Thank you, Victoria. Thanks for the opportunity.
Good night.